like to invite the previous presenters up on the stage, and we can answer some questions. And I kind of like to flip the order this time. I'd like to open it up to the room right away. I'm sure there's tons of questions for each of you. Right? Don't be too shy. Oh, Rob.
I actually have a question for Dan, who I know very well. We used to work together, and I will say I'll give Dan and his wife credit. Dan got me into machine learning in 2015. Dan had no idea what it was, and through his wife, who's a data scientist, that I probably helped as well too. But that gave me the confidence. But I'm curious because I know exactly what you meant, but I kind of want to hear it from you as well. What made the engineers not trust that AI?
Well, I mean, you're an engineer. I mean, I think myself too, I feel like I fall on different parts of the spectrum. Like sometimes I want to be innovative. I want to push something. I want like a better result, a faster result. But at the end of the day, like if you have something wrong, like it could be a catastrophe. So I think that weighs on engineering decisions and processes. But I think, you know, we tried to approach it in a different way, a way that could mitigate risk. And even then, I think people don't necessarily know what you're talking about. Like, I've had so many conversations where we sort of talk past each other. And AI is like a huge buzzword right now. And so it's even easier to talk past each other. And so if you don't know what it is, and maybe I'll pose the question back to you. What sold you on AI?
You're stealing from my presentation for later, but basically, what sold me to AI was about there's just the generic concept of taking smart data, fitting a curve to the data, and you get a smart answer based on that smart data. And in my mind, I was saying that's what humans do. That's what we do as experienced engineers. We cache it. We cache the smart data in our brain. But if you can crowdsource that data and put it into an app for the company, it changes the ball game. That's what got me into machine learning.
Yeah, and I think like same for me. It's like that. It's sort of represents an intuition, and so somehow we like rely on our intuition and trust our intuition, but really it's just like our processing and storing of data. Uh, and so to me, it's not so different.
We got a question in the back there.
Dan, I think this is a follow-on question for you. It's the corollary to why the engineers would be nervous. You mentioned the guaranteeability of the results. And when we look at this, the transparency underneath the calculations or the process that gets to the results helps with that guaranteeability. Because you can say, all right, guys, this is how we got to it. If you have a totally black box, language model based thing, that transparency isn't necessarily there, but do you have it built in a way that like they can see where the precedents are that we're being pulled from to get to that information?
Yeah, so I mean, they're basically creating that themselves. They're creating the functions, and then we use the functions, and we use the AI not so much for like replacing the function itself, but in the exploration. And so we narrow down the space, we get down to where we think has the best probability of finding a good solution, and then we run their function. And so we can very explicitly tell them, like, hey, if it's something wrong with it, it's your fault.
I just wanted to add, I think on a like similar note at TT, our AI team, like they've been working on these micro apps. And I think like some of those lessons learned we had from that first version of Asterisk, like they've actually spent a ton of time documenting what's happening behind the scenes and all these ML apps and where that data is coming from and any of those assumptions, which I think has been really helpful as part of that process. And then a lot of these tools too are starting to do code checks on top of the results that are coming out. So it's generating those results, but then it's doing an analysis to verify them as well. And I think that's helping build more trust, especially at that kind of micro app level.
Thanks.
Charlie?
So
Sorry.
we kind of going to spend the time looking backwards. And one of the things that we look backwards and look forwards at is we're trying to capture all of that institutional knowledge. We're democratizing, creating apps. We're collecting that all together. But as we think about what has happened in the software world, microservices have become a tax because there's a whole bunch of knowledge that we now have to maintain. What are you guys doing, and what have your groups done to help make sure that as we take this knowledge on, it doesn't become an overburden as we collect all that different stuff and bring it through the innovation funnel?
Yeah. I'm gonna answer this simply. We, for what I've shown in our group, like even though we've been at it for 6 years, I'll be really frank. Like we operated at such a high pace and high volume, we don't have an answer for that question. We're still operating how we were 5 years ago. I think now what we're trying to get to is understanding not necessarily what are the apps that we can create. I think we're trying to figure out how to integrate. And so like being at this event and seeing previous software, right, in the panels before us, it's like, where does it end and where can we pick up, or where does it not have to end? And I don't think we're there as an industry quite yet. And so we either just have to do it on our side. And there was a report done by JLL in 2023 that looked at the influence of AI on industry and market sectors. And up in the top 5 was architecture and engineering. Like it's going to affect it. Construction was at the end. And I find it interesting because we're at an AEC event and our goal is to bridge that gap. You know, things still need to become physical, but the physical thing that's made still has a digital asset. And that hasn't made its way upstream back into the design process. And so like connecting those two, I find really interesting, but I don't really have an answer for. So.
Okay, maybe slightly different perspective then. From the side of a software company, I mean, like you said, I do agree that we see the same pattern in the industry, meaning, you know, when a shiny new thing comes out, right, the first instinct of any business is to monetize it in some way, shape, or form. But you know, and I actually recently, literally this morning, had a similar conversation with some colleagues to try and explain that there is a different way. There are more ways to generate value than to charge for something. You have to be creative, but it's not impossible. And I think, I mean, think about it. Even I don't know how many years ago, but 10 years ago, even nobody had thought of subscription as a viable model for software, right? Everything was perpetual, everything was different. So, and I think business models evolve. If you look at, I keep picking on them today, not specifically, but if you look at Speckle as a great example, like who would have thought X years ago that open source is a viable model for a business, right? So there is ways to deliver value with these pockets of expertise. It's just, I think then the responsibility is on the firm, whether it's a design firm, whether it's a software firm, is to figure out a creative way to deliver it to people and increase access, right? And that's much easier said than done, but I don't think it's impossible.
We can also go to the next question. Charlie?
Oh,
Yep. Great presentations. This question might be slightly more targeted towards Andrew, but it kind of works across the board. How do you identify value in risk? Because a lot of what we do is it's a big risk, right? You know, from engineering calculations to you know, products and so on. So how do you identify that there's value there?
One of the things, it all comes like on the contracting side, it's in the bid process. If you can't think of how to put a number to it, there's risk somewhere. Whenever you haven't seen something before, there's risk because you have to like do something you've never done, you've never demonstrated, you don't have context to pull from. And so in the case of this project, like, I mean, you wouldn't typically see shiplap as being a risk anywhere, but when you're operating with panels that are 50 feet wide, and if something crashes into it, you have to like delaminate the whole project and reinstall it. So those become very easy to identify. The other ones, quite honestly, is kind of overlooked, right? Risk. You find risk later on, typically when you're constructing, and you need the lesson learned to be like, okay, what could we have done better here? Like, what actually went wrong? What could we have done better to identify it and pass that forward? So right now I feel like it's retroactive learning, but it's mainly based on experience and then leveraging relationships. You know, it's like we're all humans, we make mistakes. That's okay, but with the financialization of development nowadays, it's a different ballgame than it was even 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So it's a really big challenge, but what we're trying to do now is bring in the digital tools and take architects' models, take engineers' models, and say, we don't want to use them just for reference. We want that to hold more meaning, and then we can extract information. And if we can begin to do that, then we could even start to pump information back up and be like, as you're designing, this is how much it costs.
Can I follow up? Same for you also, Andrew. In terms of your engagement with the design team as the contractor, when did this begin? Because it sounds like you had already began at a formal bid process. But then it also sounds like you were working hand in hand with structural engineers in order to bring this thing to life. Like, can you give us an idea of what the timeframes were like and how many tools you're building across that timeframe? And then also the types of learnings that you have about how to improve those engagements or how you would better organize a project of this scale with knowing that you need to design or build these types of specialty tools. Like, what kinds of lessons learned come out of that, the type of engagement and the time frame that you were given, and what are some ideals you'd like to see in the future?
Yeah, so we were a design build contractor, so we worked with the design team, but we came in and during the bid process, we designed an alternate. And so the alternate got accepted and we implemented. We had TT as our engineer of record for the facade, but there was a different EOR for the primary, who's Lyra, also here in the city. Stantec is the arc of record. Ma and Mad was, you know, the design of record. So it was all condensed. It was supposed to be really quick. And I'm trying to see where to go with this, because there's a couple of things that you asked. Number of tools, we had to create a whole new team just to even begin to do it. We didn't have anybody that could do it, and we were up to 23 people at one time, and we were developing not only with TT at the time, like, what is this geometry optimization going to be? How are we going to fabricate? How are we going to lay out? So there was multiple things being done all concurrently. And now it's just being implemented, and it's been implemented now for a couple of years, and it's maintenance mode, getting it done. So I hope I'm answering some of your questions. There was, what would I do differently? I would encourage, I really like IPD. I like integrated processes. I like that contract structure. That's not advantageous for all building typologies. I've worked on really great casino projects where it's just like everyone just go, figure it out, and the quicker you get done, you all get paid. But that's not the luxury that every project has. So it's a really challenging question, but like I'm always an advocate of bringing on your trade partners early, getting them in there, bringing the knowledge upstream, bringing the knowledge downstream. But then ultimately, like if you can't do that, the one biggest thing I think helped this project was having a clear, concise description of what was important. And this project was all about a sculpture in the park, right? It needed specifications, it needed the rule book, but it was a sculpture in the park. So any decision that had to be made by anybody had to fulfill that. And so if you can't get through the contracts and all that, just like be very clear. Make sure everyone's on the same page.
Got one right there in the middle.
I think my question's maybe a little bit more directed towards Alexandra with the chatbot idea. I was just curious about the idea of data engineering and what you had to do, because it's something that's less, an email is like less deterministic, less formula, and it's so variable. And so, like, even in terms of horizontal and vertical scales, like horizontally, how did you come to like a 30 number of emails? Like, what is a clean email? How did you decide that that's a good number, and why did you not scale it up? But then also, did you try to use it on other people? Is it just because of that one guy and the way he communicated that made it able to turn into a data set? Or do you think there's potential to either make another chatbot for somebody else or a chatbot that aggregates everybody else into one thing? What did you see when you went through that process?
All right, so I'll say that happened before I joined TT, which was about 5 months ago. We can chat more with the AI team afterwards. But I think to kind of answer the second part of your question, which is kind of like, how do you start to think about expanding that? So that has been something that we've been thinking a lot about as a firm, and how do we kind of capture that knowledge? And we're going through some pilots right now where we're pulling in data from a bunch of different areas within our enterprise into a kind of chat system that we can start to ask those questions too. Yeah, it's going great. Yeah, we're in the early stages of the pilot, but it's really, I mean, I'd say as somebody who's like new to TT, we have so much information in many different places within our organization that all needs to be kind of tied together. So to be able to start to ask some of those questions in a chatbot format has been really helpful, just in kind of finding and onboarding information. Yeah.
Got a few here. I think that one was first. Yeah, go for it. And then Ian in front.
My question's particularly for Andrew. The project that you showed there was more than 50,000 parts, I think, or something that you mentioned. When you're on site with that many, like that complexity and that many parts, has the prospect of using any kind of XR tools ever seemed of any business value to you? Or is that not like a feasible solution or at that scale?
You said Excel tools?
XR. So
I may not
basically-
know what that is.
Yeah.
Oh, XR. Okay, yeah, okay. Our company has a sister company that developed. We were developing on the HoloLens like 7-8 years ago. It's now moved to Apple, mainly because we just wanted mobile devices. We looked into it. There's great use cases that we would love to use it for. But there's a limitation with it. It's your brain. It's the human biology. Not everybody's brain processes information the same way graphically. And so that was the biggest hurdle with HoloLens. We moved into now just using iPads and iPhones. And we're trying to create a project management tool out of it. But it's really for QC. And that's how we use it. It's not for accuracy. It's not precise. We can't tie it into a coordinate system. So it's mainly just like, is this there or is it not there? And then at that point, do you really need a phone? Or can you just, OpenSpace has done a really great job. You can process while we're all sleeping. So there's some really interesting things going on, but I mean, I'm sure like anybody probably has another comment on that too, because we've tested it, but.
I mean, I would just say from my own personal experience over the years, I think, and you mentioned it in your talk, it's been a challenging space to kind of move into. I do hope that with, as we start to have more powerful augmented reality where you're not as tethered and you see more of the environment around you, I really do see a future where it'll be, have stronger use cases. But I think until we get there computationally, I think it's going to be a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, I'll add on to that too, is like that there are significant technological challenges to make it as commercially viable as possible. Like, I mean, look, theoretically, right? Again, I joke about the McKinsey slides. On the McKinsey slides, it looks sick, right? And you got these marketing graphics, and it looks awesome. Well, every time I see those, I ask like a couple basic questions, like, okay, so we can overlay the BIM data over the reality. That's awesome. But wait, so how do we get the BIM data to the device? Oh, we need really good 5G. Okay, well, what if we're building in the middle of nowhere, right? And then about the quality, about what you actually see. How do we have enough on-device compute? And then of course the last question is, well, all right, so you need super strong 5G, you need super good compute. What's the battery life on this thing? Let's not even start talking about OSHA certifications or like safety constraints, right? So like you add up all these things and you create a very technically complex problem to solve, which yes, if you were to able to solve it, it's a great and very compelling value proposition. Of course, yeah, there is the human element too, but the point is, it's just from a tech perspective, it's super challenging and that's why nobody's done it, right? If it was possible, somebody would have done it by now, and everybody on the construction site would be wearing one of these things.
Alex, you plotted a fantastic trajectory of technology, and it made some of us feel very old.
Me too.
And you included in there The Future of the Professions, which is a book that I recommend everybody read as well. And I'm glad you had it up there. In your position now of authority and also sort of looking towards the future and being on that trajectory that TT, I would say, is at the forefront of plotting, a two-part question. The first is, what are the things that with the technologies that you see coming online are going to be most impacted for, I'll ring fence it around engineers working at TT, let's say, the things that are going to go away or seismically change in the next few years? And two, for a lot of the younger generation who are in the back of the room here, what are the things that they would need to be doing to prepare themselves for the next generation of technologies?
Okay, wow. So, I mean, I really do think, I know there's a lot of hype around AI, but I really do think it's going to be a really impactful technology in our entire industry. I think it's, it could really critically change the way that we work. And so as far as, I think I do see it is going to be more of like it's not going to replace what we do, but it is going to be this like co-pilot that's going to help supercharge some of the things that we do. So like if you look at it, say in some place like an engineering firm, like even as you come in as an early engineer and you're learning how to design something, right? To be able to kind of quickly iterate through those different options and kind of use it as a tool for helping learn and increasing that knowledge. So I definitely see it there. And I hope that we see it chip away at the parts of our practice that are, maybe not using as much of our design thinking as part of that process. There's a quote that Omid sometimes shows in our presentation about like, you want AI like to do your laundry and your dishes, not to do your art and your pottery, right? So I guess that's more hopeful thinking, I'd say. And then, so to your second question, on for younger people entering. I was kind of reflecting a lot on career paths when I was putting this presentation together, and that, it has been very squiggly and you're trying to, always figure out and redefine your role. So I would say, as somebody coming in who's young, like, think about that. Like, think about like, how do you start to think about how you can carve a career path that is maybe not there yet, right? And I think for a lot of people in this room who have done that, that's where a lot of these really great new technologies have come from. You've veered off the path, you've done something different. So I think, just looking for more of those opportunities.
I don't know. I used to think I knew. I feel like I used to know, but now I don't know. Like, I don't know what the future is going to be like, and the youngsters coming up, I don't know what problems they're going to have to deal with. I know what today's problems are, but I don't know what tomorrow's problems are. So I think, to your other question, I think critical thinking is super important, right? Like, we need to be able to adapt, and we need to always question, and we need to, like, be able to acquire new skills. Like, we need to be comfortable with the idea that we don't know what tomorrow's going to be, and we have to be able to figure it out tomorrow.
Cool. I think we got one question there in the back.
Yeah, so I was thinking about the chatbot sort of model, and it seems like in a certain way you lucked into having a really great data set of having really well curated emails for that. I've also seen firms that have developed their own image generation models by taking all of the renderings that they've done for the last 15, 20 years and starting to train their own models on top of like a Mid-Journey or whatever. My question is, for kind of an average firm that hasn't been meticulously collecting data, there is sort of like this expectation that we could just drop all of our Revit models into some kind of AI and it gives us some amazing product out of it. My question is, like, what are some existing data sources that you think like any kind of normal firm would have that they can start to think about, like using machine learning or AI or large language models to start to train bespoke solutions for themselves that give themselves like, this is our data that fed this, and this is our solution that's producing out of it.
Yeah, so it'd be good to hear other people's thoughts on this too. But I think, one good source is just the type of stuff that you keep in your ERP system, like, your project data, your billings, like who your clients are, the consultants you worked with, the time you spent on projects. So I think that's an interesting type of data source that most firms have that you can start to think about. And then, I think there's still a lot of work to be done on, like, how do you leverage something like drawings and PDFs? That's, I think, a really complicated space. But there have been some interesting, like, improvements on the image front where you can, images that you do have as part of your firm, if you're looking to do like AI image generation, that there's certain platforms that you could feed those into.
Oh, yeah, a bit on that because we experimented with that at KT a fair amount. And our approach was always go for the lowest common denominator. Like, what are the things that every firm has? You have drawings, you have specifications. Now, I totally agreed that on the image front for the drawings, we might not be there yet in terms of good solutions, but all this text that you have on the drawings, on the keynotes, on the specifications, change orders, RFIs, all that stuff. And I think LLMs are already at a super good place where even with basic categorization, you could do something as simple as, feed it all your RFIs and change orders over X years. Well, it'll probably give you a pretty good indication of like what are the commonalities, right? That's just one example, but that's how we always thought about it. It's like, what is the lowest common denominator that even like a one-person firm that's doing small-scale residential houses has, and see what you can get out of it, because I think there's a lot.
Well, I don't really want to say what my ideas are. But yeah, I think there are lots of opportunities. It's definitely a very strong, it's surprisingly good at being able to find information in text. And so if you look at your text and what your options are, for me, I think like one just vector of where we use it is in search. And I mean, for me, it's just like our intranet. We have such a hard time finding anything, and so anything that involves search, it makes it huge. I mean, just being able to find information, find who to talk to, find some document or information within a document. But there are challenges in that. I mean, if you expect that the technology today is just going to give you everything that you want, we've tried a lot of out of the box solutions, and they haven't really worked that as well as we thought they would. So we've had to do a lot of work ourselves, try a lot of different solutions. So it's a lot of work. So you need to have, I guess, a focus on what it is that you want to achieve. But yeah, as a tool, it's really great.
All right, we got one final question over there.
Hey, I'm Nihansh. I flew in all the way from LA, so I was gonna give you an example. So when I was in school, I had a professor from SciArc, Pavel Gitov, and he used to be a project architect for the Getty. And my question to him was like, well, the Getty cost almost 1 billion or more to build, and probably 15 years when you combine design and construction. So did Richard Meyer and Partners, their firm that kind of designed it, and then whoever was the contractor who built it, like, did they ever run a simulation on what it would cost now, what the team size would be, and what the time duration would be? And I know that some of you guys are building internal tools to help your workflow. Some of you guys are building like B2C kind of tools. So how does that process work when you're kind of vetting these tools out for actual use? Do you kind of like, how does the piloting kind of phase work? How does the beta testing phase work? And then once you've actually worked it out and run it through a couple of projects, do you actually look back and see the numbers, like the cost benefit, the staffing analysis of how these tools have actually changed your volume of work, output? Like, let's say if we had to build the Taj Mahal today, how much would that cost? Like, in terms of construction design. So yeah, that's kind of my question.
I'll take a quick stab, but I think we're all gonna have probably vastly different perspectives. The way that we think about it is infrastructural robustness. As a contractor, you're throwing many different challenges. You can learn from those challenges, and that typically goes into the art of bidding, right? Like that, there is an inherent feedback. Like using the technology, like we don't do any of that. I'll just be straight up. But there's a whole other element, and it's funny you bring up that project because we worked on that project in LA. Not me, but my firm did. And if you've ever been there, every joint aligns in plan, in elevation, like the whole stone everywhere. And we did the entry wall when you get off of the tram. We built it and they didn't like it. We tore it down. We built it. They didn't like it. We did it about 20 times. And the last time that we did it was exactly the first layout that they had. And so what's interesting is like dollars really matter, but at the end of the day too, it's so do aesthetics, and so do like you have to provide what somebody wants. And that's actually hard to quantify. I don't know how many times that happened at that project, but that's a really good reference point. Like even for doing something bespoke, like someone said it, like every building is unique. You're always going to have those challenges. So I don't think you're going to always be successful, but I'll let the other people talk about how you guys are actually using it, because we don't.
Go ahead, go.
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple questions in there. I think to simulate how cost changes over time is quite difficult. I don't know that I have an answer for that. But for the other point is like, how do you measure the value that things create? I think that one's, for me, was fairly easy. And it was the same approach when I was working at KT and BBJ as it is now, which is, and it boils down to the fact that most of us, whether we're in architecture, engineer, or construction, we're more or less in a service industry where time equals money, right? So you look at the way that you do something today. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be placing keynotes on a sheet, right? And it's not too difficult to estimate the average time that it takes to complete that task, multiplied by some kind of average salary or cost of an employee, and you get a very quick dollar amount, right? And when you have an idea for a solution to automate it or to improve it, then you can kind of estimate how much time it saves, aka how much value it generates, right? And your question about beta testing and all this, I think this needs to happen way before building anything or beta testing anything, right? Like you should have that calculation to be sure that you're solving a valuable problem before you test something. And then, yeah, of course, once it's in a beta or something, you give it in the hands of a design team and you see if it actually works the way that you intend, right? And whether you refine it or you got to scrap it. But For me, that was always the best approach in the AEC space.
Yeah, so I think, there's that kind of the value of time, I think is really important. And, I think we're trying to figure out how much time does it save and what does that mean? But I think there's another part to it that's important as well, that's like not as sometimes measurable, which is really like, how do we leverage these technologies to help us do different things as a firm? Or think about designs in a different way, or give us capabilities that we didn't have. And I think that's a little bit less easy to measure. But, for instance, if we're using technology that's making, what our engineers are doing more enjoyable, like that has value too. So I think, yeah, so I'd say in addition to those are the types of things that we would think about when evaluating technologies.
I mean, I think architecture and designs have gotten more and more complex. Like it's a kind of a moving goalpost, right? As our capabilities increase, the challenges increase, right? So we're kind of always figuring out the new thing. And I guess if you knew the cost something was going to be and it was a very big number, like would it go forward? So you have uncertainty at the beginning of the design, and you don't really know what it's going to be until kind of you get to the end. And so I think with better technology and better simulations and foresight, maybe then you can front load those decisions to be able to decide, do you want to pay for the shiny thing, or do you want like the more sustainable thing, or whatever. I think that changes technology can change the conversation.
All right. Thank you very much. Thanks to our speakers.